I'm Ayca and welcome to my Corona Diaries. Now, I'm a presenter on TRT World and currently in self-isolation due to an illness that I have that puts me in the extreme vulnerable group because of the coronavirus. Now, initially it was aimed at 12 weeks, but it looks like it's going to go beyond that, so I should stop counting, but I am in week 10. Now, I'm still presenting this show from home. I'm aiming to present weekly to explore the challenges facing all of us in self-isolation. Now, this week we are talking about being vulnerable during this pandemic. As countries have started easing lockdowns and the social distancing measures, also the restrictions, and some are reopening schools. But while all this is going on, vulnerable people are uncertain what it means for them. And when I say vulnerable, it's people who are over the age of 65 or with underlying health conditions. Now, it's already been very tough on us and for them because we've been shielding so far. And our viewers have shared with us their stories today, how they're coping throughout this time and their future worries. Now, to talk further on this, there are two guests joining me on the program today, both in the vulnerable group, a retired TV producer and also diabetes sufferer, Peter Phelps, and Aaamna Waheed, who is living with cystic fibrosis condition, and also she's studying to be a dietitian. Now, thank you very much for both of you joining us on my Corona Diaries today. Now, Peter, let's start with you, but first watch the video from our correspondent Ali Mustafa looking at how people over 65 are affected in Canada.
Here in Canada, people over the age of 65 have been some of the worst affected, not only as far as the infection rates are concerned, but also having to deal with living life day after day in isolation. We're talking about high rates of anxiety and depression for people that need help to run everyday chores like going out to buy groceries, paying their bills, which was already hard enough before this pandemic, but it's been made worse as a result of COVID-19.
Now, Peter, I mean, can you relate to that? Because it doesn't sound too different to the experience here in the UK as well, being left in isolation and having to deal with anxiety and stress.
I've been in isolation for since the beginning of March. I haven't been out at all, nor has my wife. And we've managed okay. Staying at home has not been too much of a problem. Watching television all the time, obviously. We've managed to get our groceries and things delivered to us by dear friends. So it hasn't really affected us a lot. But I'm very frightened to go out because, as you know, I suffer from diabetes. And I heard on the television that 1/3 of deaths in England were to diabetics. So I'm a bit frightened about that.
Well, how are you coping with that stress and anxiety?
I'm all right, really. As I said, I'm frightened about catching it, so that's why I've stayed in. We haven't been out once, so I'm coping okay. You know, it's a bit boring staying at home all day long, though. I'm used to going out.
Of course. Well, let's bring in Aaamna here, and Aaamna, let's watch Vanetta there from New York.
Our state has been in quarantine since March 16th. About 2 weeks after the quarantine, my doctor suggested that I stay in complete isolation because the medications that I take for my myasthenia suppresses my immune system to the point where I am at high risk of complications if I were to contract COVID-19. So since about the end of March, I've been in complete isolation. It's very difficult because they say that stress can actually cause an exacerbation in symptoms for myasthenia gravis, and that's exactly what has happened to me. Since being in quarantine, just the stress of not being able to see my family and just the anxiety and worry about contracting it has caused me to become quite symptomatic. So I am having issues with weakness and difficulty speaking because of the myasthenia gravis. But I know that it's all a hard time for all of us, and I'm sending well wishes and well thoughts to all those out there who are quarantining with not only myasthenia gravis but other autoimmune diseases. Stay strong.
Now, when we're talking about vulnerable people, we always think of the elderly, but there are so many conditions which affects young people too, as to Vanetta, and I have the same condition with her. So, Aaamna, in your case, you have a long-term condition as well. How are you coping? And what is the scariest part here for the vulnerable people? Is it the thought of what it means if we would contract the virus, or is it not having family and friends around?
So I actually live with a condition called cystic fibrosis, and I have had it since I was 4 months old. So somebody like me, I've lived with it for the entirety of my life. So I feel like it doesn't feel any different. This is normal for me, but I completely understand that everyone's totally different. I think it has been quite difficult in the fact that we aren't able to leave our houses. The furthest I can go is my back garden, but I feel very grateful to have one to go to. And it is completely understandable. I think in times like this, it's just important to look at the smaller things and just be grateful, to have a roof over our heads, to have access to food, running water. It has been hard. I think there has been obviously an anxiety that obviously at some point hopefully we will be safe enough to go out again, but it's sort of having that fear that there still might be something lurking out there. How do we adjust to going back to normal?
So to stay positive is the best way forward here. But Peter, so let's watch Chris's video here from London and take it from there.
How are you feeling, Chris, in general about lockdown?
Well, for us and my family personally, it's been actually enjoyable. My children have been looking after me so well in bringing groceries, and it's been beautiful weather. Because we've been able to go out for a walk for 1 hour, and we've been able to walk in Richmond Park, it's been rather beautiful.
In terms of what it means for the vulnerable people now that restrictions are being eased, do you have an understanding? Is it transparent to you?
Oh yes. I follow the news avidly, and as they're easing things, things will become better. I'll be very pleased when I can go down the pub to see my friends. I think that the government is doing all it can in a very, very difficult situation.
Okay, so let's bring him back, Amna here, and we have a video from Miranda there, our correspondent, telling us how it's been in France.
France is finally beginning to enjoy the outdoors again after more than 2 months under strict lockdown, and that includes people from vulnerable communities. Even though 89% of all COVID deaths in the country are in people over the age of 65, when it came time to decide how the country was going to come out of confinement, there was strong opposition to specific restrictions being placed on the elderly and people with chronic illnesses. Some experts say that prolonged isolation for these vulnerable communities could actually cause more mental and physical suffering. So, President Emmanuel Macron announced that lockdown measures would be eased for everybody, with no discrimination between age groups. Instead, he said it would be left up to individual responsibility to decide how people want to handle the rest of the pandemic.
Now, as Miranda said there, Amna, France is easing lockdown and leaving it up to an individual to decide whether they have to keep on shielding or not with underlying health conditions or who are elderly. Now, do you feel that governments are transparent enough when it comes to vulnerable people in their strategy to health concerns?
Obviously, being in lockdown, it's difficult not being able to go out, not being able to see friends and family. So it's sort of just allowing people to have that freedom, but at the same time, understanding the risks and the implications. I mean, in terms of myself, I know that so far I'm not allowed out of the house until I think it's the end of June. Until then, I don't know if the government will send another letter out to say differently, but I think I know what's happening is for the best.
If they send that letter, Amna, would you go out?
I would love to, but I know my parents probably wouldn't be happy. I think they would be the next sort of barrier for me. I think they wouldn't let me leave. They're very, very, anything that comes into the house, they're disinfecting it, and they'd be the next barrier.
Now let's bring back Peter and watch the video from Turkan and Çilem in Turkey, in Istanbul.
Pandemi süreci ne kadar zor olsa da annem ile birlikte evde keyifli hale getirmeye çalıştık. Hiç yapmadığımız yemekleri yaptık. Güzel sohbetler ettik.
Evet.
Oyunlar oynadık. Balkonumuzda çiçeklere baktık.
Çok güzel geçti.
Keyifliydi.
Evet.
Sıkılmadık çok fazla.
Yok sıkılmadık.
Yani devletimizin bize verdiği izin gününde de dışarı çıkmanın keyfini, tadını çıkardık. Yaşlar başımızın tacı. Onları her zaman hürmet
Allah razı
etmeliyiz.
olsun.
Onların tecrübelerinden yararlanmalıyız. İnşallah bu zorlu süreci hep birlikte atlatacağız.
Evet.
Now, Peter, in some countries such as Turkey, it's part of the culture and tradition to look after the elderly and take care of them. So when they can't take care of themselves, usually, in many cases, children take them in, they look after them. And maybe Turkey, do you think, can set an example to the high rate of elderly who have lost their lives in Western countries? Do you think that's something we should look at, maybe?
I think I know Turkey very well, and I understand that the elder people are looked after by the younger people in the family, and that's a brilliant idea. That doesn't really happen in England very much. Old people normally live by themselves. They don't often live in a family group, and I think that it would be much nicer if that sort of situation could move it to England as it is. I think that. I haven't seen my parents are both passed, but I haven't seen my sister since the beginning of March. And it would be very nice to be able to live much more in a family group than we do now. Although I do have a lovely Turkish wife that looks after me very well.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining us on the programme today, Peter Phelps and Aaamna Waheed. And do stay safe. So I hope it's been helpful for everyone out there. And next week, we will be talking about gender roles, how gender roles have shifted throughout this pandemic. Are we going back to the 1950s? And if you have any questions or any thoughts about this, do send it to my Instagram account, Chacha. Also, you can watch all our episodes on our YouTube channel, Diaries TRT World, and do stay safe and safe.